Accessing peace. Existing without violence, with the ability to calmly resolve conflict. Downloading love. An overwhelming, deep, positive affection towards others. Activating liberty. Living your life as you see fit without infringing on the lives of others.
Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism, and I'm here to answer your questions, because that is what I do on Fridays when you send questions, and a couple of you did that this week. Now, if you have some questions that you want answered, you can send those over using the anonymous, if you want it to be anonymous, contact form on the website, ama.fppradio.com. I also post things on social media, generally on a Monday at some point. So you can, comment on there, and if I see the comments, and there have been times where I've not noticed the comments for several days or weeks. So if I happen to see the comment with the question, I will answer it. Now, again, I do happen to frequently go back and just look, did anybody ask questions previously that I've not answered? So I might not answer it immediately if you leave the comment on social media somewhere. But again, the way that I definitely will see the question is when you use that contact form, ama.fppradio.com. So the first question this week has to do with taxation. And note, the question isn't, Darryl, is taxation theft? Because that would be a very, very simple question to answer. And the answer is yes. Yes, taxation is theft. No. This question goes a little bit deeper. Question is, what did the government do prior to the 1913 tax law? Now, first, I have to explain what that 1913 tax law is. And if you happen to know a thing or two about American history, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Talking about the creation of the Internal Revenue Service. The Revenue Act of 1913, also known as the Tariff Act or the Underwood Tariff Act, that wound up with the subsequent ratification of the 16th Amendment, created an income tax that, depending on who you ask, either applies to every man, woman, and child in the United States earning over a certain amount of income, or it only applies to, I forget exactly what some of the claims are, like it only applies to businesses and not income that I make as part of a job, something. But again, not delving into some of the theories, the legal theories surrounding the 16th Amendment, but rather what actually happened. So let me go over some of these tax rates that existed in 1913 for people earning between $0 and $20,000. And again, this is in 1913 dollars. So I will give you a rough equivalent for what some of these figures are today. So between $0 and $20,000, 1%. That was the quote-unquote normal rate with zero additional. And actually, the normal rate for everything was 1%. And then there were additional rates for other things. There were a total of 7 tiers here, between $20,000 and $50,000, there was an additional rate of 1% for a combined rate of 2% of income. Between $50,000 and $75,000, there was another 3% rate. Up to $100,000 was a total of 5%. $250,000 was 6%, and then $500,000, 7% total tax rate. Now, again, some of those figures adjusted for inflation. $500,000 in 1913 equals $11 million roughly today. The wiki article here says there were exemptions for $3,000 for single filers, $4,000 for a married couple. Therefore, the 1% bottom marginal rate applied only to the first $17,000 of income for single filers, or the first $16,000 for married filers in 1913. And again, in 1913, a double income household was very, very rare. And again, that $3,000 adjusted for inflation would be roughly $66,000 as of 2010. $20,000 in 1913, equivalent to $440,000. $50,000, equivalent to $1.1 million per year. So, again, the original rates seem to really only apply to the quote-unquote top income earners, those people that were, upper middle class and definitely upper class, because I don't know anybody making $11 million that would not be considered to be upper class. So again, that's what happened in 1913. But was there an income tax ever before 1913? Some people say absolutely not. However, history says otherwise. And when I say history, I mean actual history. When you go back and you look at the history books, yeah, there actually was an income tax prior to 1913. However, it wound up not lasting. I'll tell you about it, and I'll tell you why it did not last, plus what happened before that income tax that did wind up not lasting. Oh yeah, and who was the tyrant that imposed it? This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to BIPCOT.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
In 1999, Darryl W. Perry began a search for traditional values, which led him down a path to the ideas of liberty. He tells the story in A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. Of the book, Dr. Brian Sovereign says, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes I think it's crazy, but it's always authentic. Find A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty by Darryl W. Perry on Facebook, ask for A Rebel's Journey wherever books are sold, or visit arebelsjourney.com.
This is Brian McQuaid from the Resist the Empire podcast, and you're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Maybe you're looking for a currency that can't be taxed, a currency that maybe can't be what's the word that I'm looking for here? Can't be tracked. Well, you could do that possibly with Zencash. That's because they do allow for shielded transactions, meaning that the transactions themselves cannot be tracked. They do that with zero knowledge proofs, meaning that only the sender and the receiver have knowledge of what exactly is in that transaction. It's not transparent on the blockchain. Well, maybe you're just buying a hamburger and you don't care that people see that you spent $5 on something. Now, again, just because it's a transparent transaction does not mean that people know who the sender and the receiver were. They just know the amount that was sent in that transaction. Zencash allows for this. They have both transparent and shielded transactions. Again, those shielded transactions using zero knowledge proofs. And Zencash is just a better cryptocurrency. It's a cryptocurrency that has a focus on users and usability. It's also the first private, distributed, and reliable platform for communications, transactions, and publishing. Zencash features global governance with inclusive decision-making, reliable funding for continuous improvements, and documentation and wallets in many languages, available for Linux, Mac, Windows, and Android devices. Basically, any device you have that's not an iPhone, currently, you can get a Zencash wallet. Learn more at zensystem.io. That's zensystem.io. Now, something that is totally not Zen, theft. Specifically, the form of theft known as income tax. The reason I'm talking about that is because it's the Friday Ask Me Anything, where the question that came in was about taxation. Darryl, what did the government do prior to the 1913 tax law? I just explained a little bit about what that law was and what the original rates were. I unfortunately don't have the current tax rates pulled up in front of me to do a comparison, but the tax rates are much higher than what they were in 1913. Now, if you go through and you look at some of the later tax rates, yeah, they were much higher, but there were also a lot more exemptions, so that, yeah, while there was the nominal tax rate, or not nominal, the nominal tax rate of 70%, it was not an effective tax rate of 70% because there were all of these exemptions allowed. But again, what happened before that? Well, yeah, there was an income tax prior to 1913. It was signed into law by Tyrant Lincoln on August 5th, 1861. The History Channel has the following report. They say, on this day in 1861, again, on this day, meaning August 5th, 1861, Lincoln imposed the first federal income tax by signing the Revenue Act, strapped for cash with which to purchase, or rather pursue, the Civil War. Yeah, he actually was purchasing the war, in essence. Lincoln and Congress agreed to impose a 3% tax on annual incomes over $800. Now, I don't have what that is adjusted for inflation, not directly in front of me. Scanning down in the article, they do mention what that is, so I will just continue with the article. As early as March 1861, Lincoln had begun to take stock of the federal government's ability to wage war against the South. He sent letters to cabinet member Edward Bates, Gideon Welles, and Salmon Chase, requesting their opinions as to whether or not the president had the constitutional authority to collect such duties. According to documents housed and interpreted by the Library of Congress, Lincoln was particularly concerned about maintaining federal authority over collecting revenue from ports along the southern seaboard, which he worried might fall under control of the Confederate States. The Revenue Act's language was broadly written to define income as gain derived from any kind of property or from any professional trade, employment, or vocation carried out in the United States or elsewhere from any source whatever. According to the Department of Treasury, the comparable minimum taxable income in 2003 after adjustments for inflation would have been approximately $16,000. So that $800 that was taxed in 1861 works out to, as of 15 years ago, $16,000. Adjust for 15 years worth of inflation, probably closer to $20,000, just doing rough math off the top of my head. Congress repealed Lincoln's tax in 1871, but in 1909 passed the 16th Amendment, which set in place the federal income tax system used today, ratified with the 16th Amendment in 1913. Now, what happened prior to that? Because things, quote unquote, had to be funded, right? That there were still roads and a military and all of these other things that the United States federal government were paying for. So what happened prior to that? Well, the Internal Revenue Service themselves, they have a page on their website, and yes, the link will be in the show notes where you can read this for yourself. They say, in the early years of the United States of America, there were very few taxes. Up until 1802, the nation was mainly supported by taxes on goods such as tobacco, carriages, sugar, and spirits. Spirits being liquor, not, ghosts and goblins and ghouls. During the War of 1812, a sales tax was introduced to offset the high cost of war. But yet they don't really go into any detail about that sales tax, again, because this is the history of income tax in the United States. And then they mention the income tax imposed by the tyrant Lincoln. And then in 1913, the income tax system was made permanent thanks to the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This amendment gave Congress the ability to legally assess tax on income earned by individuals and corporations. It did not take long for the government to collect substantial tax revenue. In 1918, annual collections topped $1 billion, and by 1920, revenue reached $5 billion. Stay tuned. We'll keep talking about theft. Taxes. No, I was right the first time. It's theft. Stay tuned. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $1 per month through Patreon and get perks like ad-free versions of FPP Radio News and Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. That's fans.fppradio.com.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up in any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
Hey, welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. So, I'm actually going to skip over to a different article here. Again, the link to the history of income taxes according to the Internal Revenue Service. That link will be in the show notes. But let's jump over to an article from Tax Analyst at the website taxhistory.org, where they actually go through looking at the history of taxation through various different eras. The one that I'm most interested in right now is Revolutionary War to the War of 1812. Again, because the IRS website mentions a sales tax that was introduced during the War of 1812 to offset the high cost of war. So the Tax History Project says that in 1812, President Madison appealed to Congress for a declaration of war against Britain. Anticipating this possibility, Gallatin, they mentioned his full name earlier in this article, had proposed a series of excise and direct taxes to the House Ways and Means Committee. rancorous debate over Madison's resolution, however, revealed deep political divisions on the propriety of the war. Congress proved reluctant to approve radical fiscal measures, settling for a doubling of the tariff schedule. By 1813, because of the ensuing conflict's interruption of commerce, customs revenue actually dropped by 50%. In August of 1813, a full year into the war, Congress approved a set of internal taxes, including a direct tax designed to collect $3 million in excise duties on carriages, sugar refining, and distilled spirits. Congress explicitly designated these taxes as war measures. That is very important, and I'll touch on why in just a moment. These, again, designated war measures and provided for their automatic appeal within a year of the war's termination. I think that's supposed to be repeal. Legislators made no real effort to accommodate state revenue systems as it did with the Federalist land tax of 1798, yet there was a land tax at one point. An assessor or collector did, however, have to be a respectable freeholder and reside in the district. In addition, states were granted a 15% tax discount from the anticipated sum apportioned to their citizens if the state governments collected the taxes themselves and paid the federal government directly. A majority of states took advantage of this arrangement, which spared the Madison administration the trouble of establishing an extensive bureaucratic infrastructure. Now, let's talk about this wartime measure, these wartime measure taxes. Did you know that until, it's been about a dozen years now, until about a dozen years ago, you were still paying a tax for the Spanish-American War. Yeah, that's right. And you remember how long ago that was? Well, if you don't off the top of your head, I will remind you. That thing started in 1898. And finally, in May of 2006. So 108 years after the Spanish-American War began, the IRS and Department of Treasury finally eliminated the 3% federal tax on long-distance phone service. Yeah, so that was one of the ways that the federal government wound up collecting theft. Had revenue, stole money from people, was a 3% tax on long-distance phone service. This was often called the Spanish-American War tax because it was passed to fund the Spanish-American War. But again, what's the saying? There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. Well, apparently these things can be ended after about 108 years. Again, the Tax Foundation says, as part of a broad tax package that passed by voice vote in the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, federal taxes on local phone service were also eliminated. However, the package was not immune from controversy. Tax Analyst reports the U.S. Senate Finance Committee easily approved legislation to repeal the telephone excise tax, but not without saddling it with the pet project of nearly every Senate tax writer. Although telephone excise tax repeal enjoys wide support in both chambers of Congress and from the White House, Senate tax writers may have sunk its chances of enactment by adding over 75 unrelated tax provisions, many of them controversial. And then it goes on to explain some of the weird things. Well, actually, not really weird things, but just some of the discussion here. Again, the link will be in the show notes where you can read it at your leisure. So again, tax on long-distance phone service, that was another way that the federal government funded itself prior to the income tax of 1913. And of course, there are still a lot of things that exist today. Hell, just a couple of days ago, President Trump announced that he was raising the tariff on imported solar panels, putting a 30% tariff on those. So, yeah, tariffs still exist. Even with the so-called, free trade stuff, no, it's not free. It is highly, highly regulated. Stay tuned. There's more here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, Spendabit, and Amazon at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Maybe you want to get your hands on something that the feds might not be able to realize that you have. Talking about what some people refer to as the original cold storage precious metals, specifically gold and silver, but also things like platinum and palladium. Well, since 1977, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver, also platinum and palladium. Yeah, and you heard me right, buying and selling. So maybe you need to liquidate some of your precious metals. They can help. You want to get your hands on some precious metals? They can help. And they are a cryptocurrency preferred business, meaning they would much rather have your cryptocurrencies than take a check or a money order. They're so crypto preferred that they've permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid with cryptocurrency. So pick up your phone. Well, first, I've got to give you the number, but then pick up the phone, pause the show after you get the number, and call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760, or visit them online at rrbi.co. That's RRBI, as in Roberts & Roberts Brokerage Incorporated, rrbi.co. So I think I pretty well hammered the history of taxation in the United States. Again, if that did not fully answer your question, please feel free. Send me something more detailed. ama.fppradio.com. There was another question, and I forgot to actually write down the exact wording of the question, but it was about the supposed shutdown that happened last weekend and the claims that the Democrats were basically holding the American taxpayers hostage and supporting rights for quote-unquote illegal immigrants. Well, what was happening there is President Donald Trump back in September announced that he wanted to end the DACA program, and he wanted to tie Congress's passage of some kind of program to Congress passing a budget. So it was all on Trump. The Republicans have a majority of Congress and could not pass a budget. It's all on them. And don't forget, every Friday I answer your questions. Send those over ama.fppradio.com.
The podcasts of FPP Radio are licensed under Copy Heart. We believe that copying is a form of flattery and do not abide by the copyright laws. Those laws serve to restrict the flow of ideas which no one can really own. Copying is an act of love. Love is not subject to law. If you enjoy the show, consider joining the Fans program and get perks like ad-free versions of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio and FPP Radio News, and also get a copy of the monthly newspaper FPP News. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com.